My husband wanted a divorce to marry his 9-year-old secretary, and his entire family applauded the decision. I immediately signed the divorce papers, packed up all my premarital assets, and walked out. The very next day, when my husband arrived at his manufacturing plant, the CFO informed him that the company had effectively gone bankrupt the night before. My name is Hannah. If anyone ever asks me what exact moment makes a woman living in a seemingly normal marriage suddenly wake up to reality, I would tell them it was that Friday evening. It happened right as I turned off the stove, my hands still smelling of roasted garlic and rosemary, while a pot of the hearty beef stew my husband used to love was steaming on the kitchen island. That Friday was supposed to be a normal day. At least I thought it was. From morning till afternoon I was as busy as always. I had gone to the local farmer's market, picked up fresh vegetables, and quickly stopped by our machining and manufacturing plant to check on operations before heading home to cook. 5 years of marriage. For 5 years I never once thought my family would fall apart. I met David back when he was just a regular machinist. Back then, he had nothing but calloused hands and a dream of opening his own manufacturing facility. I, on the other hand, was an only child. My parents weren't billionaires with real estate empires, but my father owned a very stable, long-running industrial equipment supply company in Texas. When I married David, my parents didn't object. In fact, they loved him. On our wedding day, my father told me something I still remember to this day. Hannah, money can always be made again, but a man who knows how to hustle and work hard is what's truly valuable. Believing in those words, I took almost my entire trust fund and personal savings to help David launch his startup, $250, zeros in cash, a long-term lease on an industrial warehouse in the Dallas suburbs, and 2 state-of-the-art CNC production lines. Add to that a roster of clients my father introduced to us. Those were the foundation bricks of David's company. The first few years were incredibly tough. There were nights we slept on folding CS, right on the concrete floor of the warehouse. In the Texas summer heat, sweat poured down our backs. During storm season, rain would flood right up to the loading docks. But back then, we were happy. At least I thought we were. The plant grew and the purchase orders multiplied from 10 machinists to 30. From 30 to nearly 100 employees, David started wearing tailored suits. He began meeting with major corporate executives, appearing at local Chamber of Commerce galas, while I quietly stepped back into the shadows. I never liked the spotlight. I believed my husband's success was our family's success until one day I started hearing the whispers. At first, it was just idle office gossip. But then it grew louder. People kept mentioning a very young secretary named Vicky, only 19, pretty sweet-talking, who always accompanied David on his business trips. Initially, I didn't care. I trusted my husband, or rather, I wanted to trust him. But that trust began to fracture. There were nights David came home incredibly late, sometimes 2 a.m., sometimes near dawn. When I asked, he claimed he was entertaining clients. When I called, it went to voicemail. Texts took hours to get a reply. Once I accidentally saw a faint smudge of lipstick on his collar. David brushed it off, laughing that a female client had accidentally bumped into him. I let it go. I let a lot of things go, because I didn't want my marriage to shatter. Until that evening, the evening my entire life changed. David walked through the front door and slammed his leather briefcase onto the entryway bench. The sound echoed loudly. I was setting the dining table and turned to look. Before I could even ask if he was tired, David looked at me with dead eyes and said, "I want a divorce." Just 4 words, but they felt like a knife driven straight into my chest. I stood frozen. I didn't ask questions. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just looked at him, feeling strangely calm deep down, perhaps subconsciously. I had been preparing for this day for a long time. My mother-in-law, who was visiting and sitting in the living room, immediately set her teacup down. What shocked me wasn't that she didn't object, but that she actually smiled, a smile of total satisfaction. "It's better you two get this over with early," she said. "When a man becomes successful, he needs a younger, more vibrant woman by his side." I stared at her. The woman who had once held my hands, thanking me with tears in her eyes for helping her son build his career. The woman who used to call me the pride of the family was now looking at me like an expired warranty. My father-in-law chimed in from his recliner. "Hannah, don't blame anyone. You and David have been married for 5 years and still don't have kids. He wants an heir to pass his legacy to, and that's perfectly normal." I laughed internally. For 5 years, David was the one who insisted we delay having kids so he could focus on growing the business. And now all the blame was being dumped on my head. Before I could speak, David pulled out his phone. He opened a photo and placed it on the kitchen island. "This is Vicky." I looked at the screen, a young girl, heavily filtered makeup, trendy designer clothes, and an overly confident smile. David looked at me, his eyes devoid of any affection. "I'm going to marry her." The air in the room grew suffocatingly heavy. My mother-in-law nodded eagerly. My father-in-law looked pleased. I just stood there in silence. I suddenly realized something profound. The most painful part of a betrayal isn't discovering the truth. It's realizing that the people you considered family had been standing on the enemy's side for a very long time. David pulled a manila folder from his briefcase and slapped it down in front of me. "I've already had the divorce papers drawn up. I keep the assets to manage the business. All you have to do is sign." I slowly picked up the stack of papers, flipping through each page, reading every line, and then the corner of my lips curled into a smirk. Reading those terms made me realize that they didn't just want betrayal and a divorce. They wanted to strip me of everything I had spent years building. But what David Actor and his parents didn't know was that for 3 months, I had been quietly preparing for this exact day. Their current celebration was nothing but the prelude to a free fall. None of them could even fathom. I gently closed the folder, smiled, and said a single sentence that made all 3 of them snap their heads up to look at me. "All right, I agree to the divorce." What I didn't tell them was that tomorrow morning, a confidential phone call I had arranged long ago would be made. And when that call went through, the entire destiny of the manufacturing plant bearing David's name would pivot in a completely different direction. After saying yes to the divorce that night, I didn't stay in the living room a second longer. I walked up the stairs under my mother-in-law's triumphant gaze, my father-in-law's quiet chuckles, and David's undisguised smugness. In their minds, I was utterly defeated. A 35-year-old childless woman getting dumped for a 19-year-old, being pushed out of the very home she helped build. What threat could I possibly pose? But the most hilarious thing in this world is blind arrogance. I locked the bedroom door, sat on the edge of the bed, and looked around the familiar room. 5 years ago, I had personally picked out every piece of furniture in here. The cream drapes were custom ordered by me. The pale blue duvet was a wedding gift from my mother. Even the bedside lamps were ones David and I had picked out during a rainy afternoon in Austin. The memories were still there, but the people had changed. I checked my phone. The screen lit up with over 20 unread messages, all from one person, Liam, the veteran plant manager who had run our production floor for years. I opened his last text. "Hannah, I have all the files prepped just like you asked. Give the word and we pull the trigger." I stared at the text for a long time before typing back. "Get everything ready, Liam. I think it's time." Less than a minute later, my phone rang. Liam's growly voice came through. "Hannah, are you absolutely sure about this?" I smiled faintly. "Yes, Liam," he paused. "I've seen everything happening over the last 2 years. I just didn't feel it was my place to speak. I'm just so sorry it came to this." I leaned back against the headboard. Outside the window, the streetlights were glowing. "Everything has an expiration date, Liam. But are you certain?" "Yes," I answered quickly. So quickly it even surprised me. But in my heart there was zero hesitation left. After hanging up, I opened the bottom drawer of my vanity. Inside was a heavy black binder. I carefully pulled out the documents perfectly organized in plastic sleeves. The deed to this house, the purchase agreements for the CNC production lines, the invoices for the heavy machinery, and the bank receipts of the initial $250,000 wire transfer. Every single one was exclusively in my name or my LLC's name. For years, I never thought I'd have to use them. But my father was different. He was always meticulous. When I married David, my dad told me trusting people is good. But keeping a paper trail is never a bad thing. Back then, I accused him of being too cynical. Looking back, a seasoned veteran always sees further than kids blinded by love. Around 1000 p.m., I heard a car pull up in the driveway. Looking out the window, a white luxury SUV parked by the curb. The person stepping out was Vicky. She wore a tight mini dress, heavy makeup, curled hair, and carried a Chanel bag. From a distance, she looked more like an Instagram influencer than a corporate assistant. I watched from the dark. Vicky walked straight into the house, didn't knock, didn't show an ounce of hesitation, and clearly felt no shame about being the other woman. My mother-in-law practically sprinted to the door to greet her. Their laughter echoed all the way to the second floor. I caught snippets of their conversation. "Come in, come in. I saved you some dessert. Tomorrow, I'm taking you to look at bridal jewelry." The way they fawned over her, you would think they had been a family for decades. David walked out, gently taking her designer bag. That tender look in his eyes was the same one I used to receive for years. Now it belonged to someone else. It was strange. I thought I would feel agonizing pain. But I didn't. I just felt cold, a deep hollow cold, as if my heart simply refused to react anymore. Half an hour later, the laughter downstairs grew louder. I opened my bedroom door and walked down. All four of them immediately froze and stared at me. My mother-in-law frowned. "What are you doing down here?" "Getting water," I replied calmly. Vicky immediately pressed herself against David's chest, acting as if I were the intruder in my own home. David wrapped an arm around her shoulder. "Hannah," David said, looking at me. "Vicky and I are going to get our marriage license as soon as our paperwork clears." "Okay," I replied. David looked annoyed. He clearly wanted me to throw a fit, to cry and scream, but I didn't give it to him. It infuriated him. Vicky smiled sweetly. "Hannah, I know this hurts you, but you can't help who you fall in love with. Love isn't a crime." I almost laughed out loud. That line is so cliché. Every homewrecker loves to recite it. I looked her dead in the eyes. "You're right, love isn't a crime, but actively destroying someone else's family definitely makes you trash." Vicky's smile instantly snapped. My mother-in-law slammed her hand on the counter. "Who do you think you're talking to?" I shrugged. "Whoever the shoe fits." I turned around and walked back upstairs. Behind me, the cursing and yelling erupted, but I didn't care to listen anymore. That night, I slept incredibly well, probably the best sleep I'd had in over a year. The next morning, I woke up to a call from my father. He only asked one thing. "Have you thought this through?" "Yes, Dad." Silence hummed on the line for a few seconds, then he sighed. "All right, from today on, I'm not holding back anymore." I knew exactly what that meant. For 5 years, out of respect for my marriage, my father rarely intervened in David's business. Even though he saw the flaws, even though he spotted the operational issues, he chose to stay out of it. But from this moment on, he was no longer David's father-in-law. He was a ruthless businessman protecting his daughter. After hanging up with him, I got another call. It was from the bank. My portfolio manager confirmed that all the documents I submitted had been processed. The legal procedures were officially activated. I stared at my phone screen for a long time, then smiled softly. Downstairs, I could hear David laughing with Vicky, my mother-in-law discussing wedding venues, and my father-in-law bragging on the phone to a relative about getting a grandson soon. None of them knew that at this very moment, the wheels of fate had already started turning. What they thought was a victory was just the final few hours of delusion before the hurricane made landfall. And the first person to realize something was catastrophically wrong wouldn't be me. It would be David, because that afternoon, when he strutted into the company office, full of joy and dreaming of a shiny new future with Vicky, a highly confidential financial audit would be sitting on his desk. And from that report, the ugly truth he had ignored for years would finally drag him into the light. When David parked his car at the plant that afternoon, his mood was noticeably arrogant. From the moment he left the house, a smug grin had been plastered on his face. He wasn't thinking about his broken marriage or the 5 years we spent building a life. All he thought about was Vicky, the luxury condo they were going to buy, their upcoming wedding, and the perfect life waiting for him, now that he had discarded the old wife who had been with him through the struggle. On his way to work, he even stopped at a high-end jeweler downtown to put a deposit on a massive diamond engagement ring. The sales associate's fawning congratulations only inflated his ego further. He swiped his black card and walked out feeling like a king. But when he arrived at the plant's front gates, something felt off. Normally at this hour, the production floor was roaring. The hum of CNC machines, the shouting of foremen, the constant beeping of forklifts moving pallets. It should have been deafening, yet today it was eerily quiet. David stepped out of his car, frowning as he looked around. The old security guard at the booth gave him a stiff, reluctant nod, completely lacking his usual warmth. "Why is it so quiet today, Stan?" David asked as he walked past. The guard hesitated. Probably pick up again later, sir." The vague answer irritated David, but he brushed it off and headed into the main office building. As soon as he reached the second floor, he saw a group of accounting staff whispering in the hallway. The moment they saw him, they scattered like roaches. A few wouldn't even make eye contact. A creeping sense of dread pulled in David's stomach. He walked briskly to his corner office. The moment he pushed the door open, he saw a thick binder sitting dead center on his desk. A red label on the front read "Urgent Financial Audit." David scowled. He sat in his leather chair and flipped it open. Within 3 minutes, the smug smile vanished from his face entirely. The numbers in the report were completely detached from his reality. Quarterly revenues had plummeted. Several major anchor clients had halted their orders. Operating cash flow was severely in the red, and most terrifyingly, there were 3 short-term bridge loans maturing by the end of the month, totaling nearly $2 million. David read the pages again and again. It was impossible. He immediately picked up the phone and yelled for Tom, the CFO. Tom, who had been with the company for 8 years, walked in looking exhausted. "Explain this to me." David slammed the binder on the mahogany desk. "What the hell is this?" Tom took a deep breath. "I sent you this projection 3 months ago, David. 3 months ago." "Yes," Tom replied firmly. "Truth is, the company started bleeding back in January. Raw material costs spiked, key clients reduced their volume, and several contracts were canceled mid-production." David fired back. "I just signed a massive $800,000 contract last month." Tom looked at him with sheer pity. "David, that contract was for $800K. "Yes, but the client only paid a 10% mobilization fee, and our overtime production costs alone ate through that in a week. We are losing money on that deal." David's head began to spin. For the last 2 years, he had almost completely outsourced financial oversight to me and the accounting team. He only cared about wining and dining clients, playing golf, and showing up at ribbon-cutting ceremonies. He honestly believed the company was an unstoppable cash cow. The reality was a slaughterhouse. Just then his cell phone rang. It was Vicky. Her bubbly voice chirped through the speaker. "Babe, I just saw the most amazing penthouse condo. It's only $1.2 million. Can you wire me $25,000 for the earnest money to hold it?" David froze. A month ago, $25,000 was pocket change. Right now, it felt like a noose tightening around his neck. "Let me look into it," he managed to choke out. Vicky's tone instantly soured. "Look into it. You promised me." David rubbed his temples, a migraine flaring. "I'm busy right now." He hung up. It was the first time since they met that he had dared to hang up on her. Outside his glass window, the Texas sky was turning gray steams aimed an impending thunderstorm. David sat paralyzed. For some reason, my face flashed in his mind. For the last 5 years, whenever the company hit a roadblock, I was the first to notice. Whenever we were short on payroll, I was the ones scrambling to liquidate my own assets to cover it. Whenever a tough negotiation loomed, I was the one burning the midnight oil, prepping the contracts, but he had always viewed my labor as his entitlement. He never thanked me. He never acknowledged it. Around 4:00 p.m., the office door opened again. This time, it was Liam, the plant manager. David looked up, exhausted. What do you need, Liam? Liam walked over and placed a white envelope on the desk. I'm giving my notice. Effective immediately. David thought he misheard. What? You're quitting? Why? Liam stared at him for a long time, his eyes heavy with disappointment. David, I've been here since day one. I watched Hannah drain her trust fund, work herself to the bone, and sacrifice her youth to build this place for you, and I've watched you change into someone I don't respect. David sat in stunned silence. Liam wasn't finished. The last 3 months while this company was drowning, Hannah was quietly trying to plug the holes. And you? You were busy flying your teenage secretary to Cabo. Every word felt like a physical slap to David's face. Did you think the floor guys didn't know? Liam scoffed. We all knew. We just kept our mouth shut. David clenched his fists, his face burning red, but he couldn't form a single word of defense. Because Liam was right. Before walking out, Liam paused at the door and looked back one last time. There are some things in this life that once you throw them away, you can never buy back. The door clicked shut. David was left alone in the massive, suddenly freezing office. Outside, the rain began to batter the glass. His phone buzzed again. It was his mother. Her voice was ecstatic. David, I just put down the deposit for the country club, for the wedding reception. Bring Vicky over for a celebration dinner this weekend. David stared blankly at the rain. For the first time, hearing about the wedding didn't bring him joy. Instead, a massive, suffocating wave of dread crashed over him. He felt like something catastrophic was hurtling toward him, and he had absolutely no power to stop it. Meanwhile, across town, I was sitting in a sleek downtown conference room with my father and Liam. Spread across the large oak table were dozens of legal files, documents I had quietly safeguarded for years. My father placed a warm hand on my shoulder. He looked at me softly. Hannah, you still have a chance to stop this. I looked at the stacks of paper, then out at the rainy skyline. After a few seconds, I slowly shook my head. Dad, I've given him way too many chances, and at that exact moment, a call from the bank came through. The content of that phone call made everyone in the room freeze because it involved a massive secret sum of money that even David didn't know existed. The bank's call came through while the room was so quiet, I could hear the rain tapping the glass. My father had just set his coffee down. Liam was reviewing an equipment manifest. I was staring at the open binder in front of me. The caller was Megan, the senior corporate account manager at the bank our company had used for years. She spoke methodically, maintaining her professional tone, but I could hear a trace of hesitation, likely because she knew the messy reality of my current family situation. Hannah, Megan started, I was reviewing the historical ledgers your attorney requested. There's a specific transaction from 4 years ago, a $100, zeros and wire transfer from your personal trust account into the corporate operating account. I remember it, I said. Well, it was never logged as a capital contribution or an owner's loan. Your old accounting team miscategorized it entirely as gross revenue from a dummy invoice. If you need it, our legal team can provide the official wire traces and affidavit to correct the record. I closed my eyes. I remembered that $100,000 clearly. 4 years ago, the plant landed a massive order from an oil field supply company. David was so ecstatic he couldn't sleep. But when it came time to procure the raw steel, we were short. He sat in our living room, holding his head in his hands, terrified that losing this deal would bankrupt us. I didn't think twice. I wired the money. I even told him, we're married, we don't need IUS. Looking back, that was the pathetic naive of a woman blinded by love. I thanked Megan and hung up. The room was silent. My father looked at me for a long time before speaking. You see, Hannah, people don't just change overnight. They change bit by bit. Every time you compromise, every time you trust them, every time you assume they have a conscience. I looked down at my hands. These hands had cooked David's meals, signed his first commercial leases, wired money to save him from ruin, and taken care of his parents when they were sick. And in the end, they threw me out like trash. The dull ache was gone. The only thing left inside me was ice. I turned to my attorney, Ben, who was sitting to my right. Ben, attach that $100,000 to the asset reclamation filings. Also, trigger a forensic audit of all major transactions over the last 5 years. Whatever is legally my separate property, whatever was misappropriated, I want it pulled. Execute everything by the book. Ben nodded. Understood. Hannah, with the bank's paper trail proving source of funds is a slam dunk in Texas, but you need to be prepared. When David gets hit with this, the blowback is going to be explosive. I smiled faintly. Let him explode. I'm not backing down anymore. My father watched me, his eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and pride. In his eyes, I was probably still the little girl who used to run into the kitchen after school. Now I was a woman clinically calculating how to dismantle a man who had betrayed her. But life is like that. Some lessons can only be learned by walking through the fire yourself. Back at the company, David was losing his mind. After Liam walked out, David frantically called his sales director, his production leads, and his chief accountant. Half of them didn't pick up. The other half gave him vague, evasive answers. David was used to being the center of gravity. He was used to walking onto the floor and having everyone defer to him. He genuinely believed he was the irreplaceable king of the castle. But as his control slipped through his fingers like sand, he began to realize that his power was built on a foundation that didn't belong to him. At 5 p.m., Vicky vaulted into David's office. She didn't knock. She was holding her phone, pouting like a spoiled child. David, why haven't you wired the money? The realtor called me twice. Someone else is going to put an offer on the condo. David looked up, his eyes bloodshot from stress. Vicky, the company is dealing with a crisis today. The condo is going to have to wait. Vicky froze. It was probably the first time David had ever said no to her. She walked over and put a hand on his shoulder. What's wrong? Didn't you say that once you divorced the old ball and chain, everything would be yours? You said you'd have the house, the plant, the money. So, what's a $25,000 deposit? David shoved her hand away. I said, it has to wait. Vicky's face instantly shifted from sweet to venomous. Are you yelling at me? David stood up, pacing the room. I'm not yelling at you, but do you have any idea what is happening to my business right now? Vicky crossed her arms. All I know is that you made a promise. I don't care about your business problems. If you can't provide the lifestyle you promised me, why did you make me wait around for you to get a divorce? That sentence hit David like a freight train. In that split second, the facade dropped and he saw the real Vicky, but his ego and his desperate need to be adored by a young, beautiful girl made him delude himself. He convinced himself she was just throwing a tantrum. He lowered his voice. Vitsky, listen to me. Let me just sort out these cash flow issues and I'll take care of you. I promise. Vicky stared at him, then let out a sharp, mocking laugh. David, I'm not a little kid. A woman wants security. Security looks like cash, a deed, and a diamond ring. Not empty promises. She grabbed her purse, spun on her heels, and walked out, leaving David standing in the middle of the room, furious and utterly bewildered. That night, when David went home, his mother was in the massive living room, hosting a few neighbors for wine. She was laughing loudly, bragging about her son marrying a young, beautiful girl, claiming that her former daughter-in-law was a frigid woman who didn't know how to keep a man and deserved to be thrown out. David walked in, his face dark as thunder. Seeing him, his mother beamed. You're home. I was just telling the ladies about your wedding to Vicky. I'm thinking we do a massive catered event at the country club. Really? Show everyone how well you're doing. Mom, drop it. Not right now. David muttered exhaustedly. His mother looked offended. Why not? You're divorced, what are you waiting for? His father frowned over his newspaper. A real man is decisive, David. Vicky is young. If you drag your feet, she might change her mind. Hearing that only made David sicker. He didn't dare tell his parents that the company was imploding. He couldn't admit he was broke. He had spent years playing the role of the self-made titan in front of them. The man who could discard a wife like an old coat and keep the castle. I'm tired. I'm going to bed, he mumbled. But his mother wouldn't let it go. Did Hannah finally get all her junk out of here? I want contractors in here tomorrow to rip out her ugly carpets and repaint so everything is fresh for Vicky. David stopped dead on the stairs. A chill ran down his spine. He suddenly remembered the deed to this McMansion was in Hannah's name. She had bought it with her trust money before they were legally married. Sure, his name was on some utility bills, but the title, the mortgage, the wire transfers, it was all hers. If he didn't even own the house he was sleeping in, what the hell did he own? David didn't sleep a wink that night. He called a dozen of his close golfing buddies to ask for short-term bridge loans. Every single one politely declined. Some claimed they were ill-quid, others said they'd check next month. One guy hung up the moment David mentioned the dollar amount. David sat in his home office until dawn. The urgent audit sat on his desk next to a phone overflowing with texts from Vicky. Every single one demanding the condo, the ring, or cash. Meanwhile, Hannah, the woman who had quietly solved every crisis he ever faced, was gone. The next morning, while my father, Attorney Ben, and I were at the notary finalizing the asset reclamation orders, my phone buzzed. It was David. I watched his name flash on the screen. I let it ring. He called a second time. I ignored it. On the third call, I finally answered. David's voice was hoarse and frantic. "Hannah, where are you? We need to talk." I looked at the legal documents in front of me, my voice perfectly flat. "We have nothing to talk about." David fell silent for a few seconds before lowering his voice. For the first time in a long time, the arrogance was gone. "I know I said some harsh things the other night, but we were married for 5 years. There's no need to be this ruthless." I let out a soft laugh. "David, when you threw the divorce papers in my face and told me to leave empty-handed, did you stop to think we had been married for 5 years?" Dead silence on the other end. I spoke slowly, enunciating every word. "You wanted a divorce. I gave it to you. You wanted to marry Vicky. I'm not stopping you. But what is mine, I am taking back, every last cent." David's temper flared. "Hannah, do not push me." I looked out the window. The sky was bright and clear. "I'm not pushing you, David. I'm just letting you fall." I hung up. But what I didn't know was that immediately after that call, David furiously drove to the bank to check the corporate accounts. And within an hour, he would discover that the money he had been secretly misappropriating would become the key that unlocked the final door to his utter destruction. After hanging up the phone, that morning I didn't give David another thought. Some people consume your mind every day when you're with them. But the moment you truly let go, all their apologies, threats, and desperation don't even cause a ripple in your heart. My father, Ben, and I continued working with the notary. Every document was triple-checked, every invoice verified one last time. I knew that what would protect me wasn't tears or nostalgia, but ironclad legal preparation. Meanwhile, across town, David had driven like a madman to his bank. From the moment he left the plant, his only thought was to prove I was bluffing, that my threats were just the hysterical revenge tactics of a scorned ex-wife. He couldn't fathom that the woman who had submitted to him for 5 years could be this surgical in her execution. But reality doesn't care about a man's ego. Many mistake silence for weakness. In truth, the longer a person stays silent, the more devastating their strike when they finally stand up. David stormed into the VIP branch of the bank, looking manic. Megan, the account manager, paused when she saw him. David used to waltz in here like a tech billionaire. Today, his eyes were bloodshot, his hair unkempt, his designer shirt wrinkled. "David, how can I help you today?" "I need a full print out of the corporate operating accounts now," he demanded. Megan asked him to sit and pulled up his profiles. A few moments later, her expression tightened. "David, the corporate accounts are currently restricted. Certain outbound wires are frozen." David shot out of his chair. "Frozen? By who?" "Due to an active legal dispute regarding capitalization and asset ownership." "That's impossible." He slammed his hand on her desk. "I am the CEO. This is my company." Megan looked at him calmly. "David, the legal filings clearly show that the majority of the capital assets are registered under Hannah's separate LLC, or were funded directly via her premarital trust. The bank is legally obligated to freeze contested assets until a judge clears it." Cold sweat broke out on the back of David's neck. Just then his phone rang. It was his procurement director. The man was practically screaming, "David, we have a massive problem." "What now?" "The steel suppliers just halted all our shipments." David jumped up. Why? Just pay the damn outstanding invoice. It's not just one invoice. The director panicked. They are calling in the entire age debt. All of it. It's just a few grand, right? No, David, it's $1.2 million. David felt the air leave his lungs. Suddenly, the financial reports he never bothered to read flashed in his mind. For 2 years, he only cared about gross revenue. He thought as long as money was coming in, they were rich. He completely ignored the mounting accounts payable. He hung up and frantically dialed Tom, the CFO. No answer. He called again. Still nothing. On the third try, Tom finally picked up. Tom, where the hell are you? Tom's voice was ice cold. I'm at HR, David. I'm signing my exit paperwork. David thought he was hallucinating. You're quitting? Are you insane? I'm not insane, David. I just know a sinking ship when I see one. Tom hung up. David stood in the middle of the bank lobby, his legs turning to jelly. For years, whenever a crisis hit, he assumed he could just call me and I would fix it. Now the person he desperately needed was the exact person he had ruthlessly cut out of his life. By noon, things got worse. Vicky called. Her voice was overly excited. David, I just found the most gorgeous Range Rover at the dealership. David rubbed his eyes. Vicky, I'm dealing with a crisis. You're always dealing with a crisis. You haven't texted me all morning. I told you the business is having issues. Vicky went silent for a few seconds. Then she asked the question that shattered him. Do you still have money? David froze. A sickening realization washed over him. He used to think Vicky loved him for him. But lately, every single word out of her mouth was about condos, cars, diamonds, weddings, and cash. David swallowed hard. If the company goes under for a little while, will you wait for me? Dead silence. Then Vicky let out a small laugh, but it wasn't cute anymore. David, stop joking. Seriously, are you broke? David couldn't answer. The silence stretched for 10 agonizing seconds. Vicky hung up just like that. No goodbye, no comfort, not a single question about if he was okay. David slumped into a lobby chair. For the first time, he remembered our early years. When the company was nothing, I walked with him in the rain. I ate instant ramen with him. I sold my own car to make payroll. When his father was hospitalized, I slept in a plastic hospital chair for 3 days straight. And Vicky, the second the cash stopped flowing, she bolted. That afternoon, David drove home, completely hollowed out. But what awaited him was even more terrifying. Parked in the driveway of the McMansion were 2 massive moving trucks. A crew of professional movers was carrying out furniture. The crystal chandelier from the foyer was being loaded. The custom hardwood dining table was already in the truck. David sprinted across the lawn. Hey, what the hell are you doing? The foreman handed him a clipboard with a court-approved manifest, executing a repossession order. These items are the sole legal property of Miss Hannah Sterling. His mother ran out of the house, screaming at the top of her lungs. Robbers, they're robbing us. But when the foreman showed them the legal documentation, the invoices, the wire transfers, the deeds, all clearly in my name, his parents were struck dumb. David stood on the driveway watching his life be packed into boxes. He finally understood. For 5 years he thought he was the king of the castle. But the moment the real owner came to collect, he realized everything he bragged about was built on my dime. Late that evening, as the last truck pulled away, the massive house felt like a tomb. His mother collapsed onto a cheap folding chair, sobbing and cursing. His father was pale and silent. David just stood there. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered it. It was Attorney Ben. David, this is a courtesy call. Tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., my client and a repossession team will be arriving at the manufacturing plant to audit and seize her physical assets. David stopped breathing. All of them? Yes, including the primary CNC machining centers. David's heart plummeted into his stomach. He knew better than anyone. If those machines left the floor, the plant was dead. And when that happened, the overdue debts, the pending orders, and the angry clients would trigger an avalanche that would bury him alive. That night, David didn't sleep a single second. He sat in his empty home office, staring at a cold cup of coffee, and the financial audit that had ruined his life. Everything was happening so fast. He hadn't even processed his mistakes before the consequences ripped everything away. Downstairs, his mother was frantically calling relatives, crying and playing the victim. She told everyone I was a heartless, greedy out to destroy her son, claiming I was stealing things that weren't mine. But what truly terrified her wasn't the furniture being gone. It was the realization that the lavish lifestyle she thought was her birthright never actually belonged to her family. For years, she paraded around the country club, acting like the matriarch of a dynasty. She bragged about her genius son. She never once mentioned that my parents were the ones who pulled David out of the mud. People get too comfortable living on a pedestal and forget who built the stairs. At 6 a.m., David got a frantic call from his floor foreman. "David, get down here now. What's going on?" "They're here." David bolted up. "Who?" "The repo guys and the lawyers." 20 minutes later, David's tires screeched as he pulled up to the plant. 3 massive flatbed 18-wheelers were parked out front. A team of lawyers, a notary, and heavy machinery riggers were already unbolting the CNC machines on the production floor. Standing in the center of it all was me. I was wearing a simple beige pantsuit, my hair pulled back into a neat ponytail. My expression was as calm as if I were reviewing a routine inventory check. In that moment, David felt like he was looking at a stranger. For years, he only saw me in the kitchen, in the living room, in the background. He had completely forgotten that before I was his wife, I was a corporate executive trained by my father to run an empire. David rushed over. "Hannah." I turned around, my eyes cool. "Can I help you?" He pointed at the riggers dismantling the CNC centers. "Are you really going to do this?" I looked at the machines. Those machines generated 80% of the plant's revenue. They were also paid for in full by my personal LLC. "What do you suggest I do?" I asked calmly. David clenched his jaw. "At least give me some time." "Time?" I laughed softly. "Did you lack time over the last 5 years, David?" He choked on his words. I stared at him for a long moment, then spoke slowly. "David, if I were the one being thrown out of the house that night, would you have given me time?" He couldn't answer. We both knew the truth. If I hadn't prepared, if I hadn't kept the paper trail, I would be living in a motel right now. While he popped champagne with Vicky, a head rigger walked up. "Miss Sterling, serial numbers match the manifest. We're ready to hoist." I nodded. "Proceed." The sound of drills and heavy chains echoed through the warehouse. Every clank of metal was a hammer smashing into David's skull. He stood there, his face completely drained of blood, watching his company get physically dismantled. Just then, a red Mercedes pulled up to the loading dock. Vicky stepped out. She was wearing oversized sunglasses and a designer dress, completely clueless as to what was happening. When she saw the flatbeds and the missing machines, she gasped, "David, what is going on?" David didn't answer. Vicky ran over, saw the machines being loaded, and then glared at me. "What are you doing?" I looked at her entirely unbothered. "I am repossessing my legal property." Vicky scowled. "Do you have to be such a vindictive?" Hearing that, a few of the riggers actually laughed out loud. Even Attorney Ben shook his head in disbelief. It was probably the first time in Vicky's life she was facing the real-world consequences of her actions. I looked at her with absolute zero pity. I agreed to the divorce exactly as David wanted. I am legally reclaiming assets I paid for. I haven't insulted anyone, I haven't slandered anyone, and I haven't broken any laws. What exactly is vindictive? Vicky's mouth opened, but no words came out, because I was right. Humiliation finally boiled over in David. He grabbed Vicky by the arm and pulled her aside. "Just go home. You're telling me to leave?" I said, "Go home." He roared. It was the first time he had ever raised his voice at her. Vicky jumped. She stared at him for a few seconds, her face turning ice cold. "Fine, fix your own mess." She spun around, got into her Mercedes, and sped off. She didn't ask if she could help. She didn't ask what would happen to the business. She didn't even ask if he was okay. David watched her taillights disappear, a hollow void opening in his chest. He suddenly remembered the year he suffered a severe concussion on the factory floor. I sat by his hospital bed for 3 days and nights. Refusing to leave to even shower, the girl he threw away his marriage for couldn't even stand by him for 5 minutes of hardship. By 10 a.m., the nightmare escalated. A convoy of vendors and suppliers arrived at the front gates, clutching unpaid invoices and breached contracts. The debt was staggering. They weren't calling him Mr. David with respect anymore. They were shouting, demanding cash, and threatening lawsuits. It was absolute chaos. Amidst the shouting, David's phone rang. It was the bank. "David, your commercial credit line has breached its covenants. We are calling the loan. You need to come to the branch today." David felt like he was drowning in quicksand. The more he struggled, the deeper he sank. The plant was dead. The clients were gone. The vendors were out for blood. The bank was foreclosing. By noon, the riggers had finished loading the flatbeds. I signed the final release forms. Attorney Ben handed me the updated asset ledger. Everything had gone exactly according to plan. But right as I was about to leave, my phone buzzed. It was Howard, the CEO of a major construction firm in Texas, and one of our oldest clients. After a 5-minute conversation with him, my expression completely changed. What Howard told me revealed a massive multi-million-dollar secret that even I hadn't caught. A secret involving money being siphoned out of the company for 2 years. And the person behind it wasn't just David. It was Vicky. The revelation left me sitting in silence for a long time. Howard had always dealt directly with me in the early days. After I stepped back, all his communications went through Vicky. I thought nothing of it, but what Howard just confessed changed the entire narrative. "Hannah, I have to ask you something off the record," Howard had said over the phone. "Did you know your company was issuing dummy invoices?" I froze. "Dummy invoices?" "Yeah," Howard sighed. "I figured you knew, which is why I never brought it up. But seeing the fallout now, I'm guessing you had no idea." I gripped my phone tightly. "Tell me exactly what happened, Howard." For the last 2 years, every time we renewed a contract, that young assistant of David's, Vicky, would ask us to adjust the invoice values. Adjust how? The actual cash we paid was higher than the number on the official contract you guys sent us. My stomach dropped. In manufacturing, skimming a few grand here and there across dozens of contracts over 2 years adds up to an astronomical sum of money. I thought maybe David was building a slush fund for corporate lobbying or something, so I didn't pry, Howard continued. But looking at how broke the company is, that money clearly didn't go into the business. After hanging up, I sat completely still. Ben noticed my pale face. "What happened, Hannah?" I told him everything. When my father heard it, his face darkened into a scowl. "If that's true, we are talking about massive corporate embezzlement." I nodded. Truthfully, I had my suspicions months ago, but no hard proof. Now the puzzle pieces were snapping together. I remembered Vicky's endless rotation of Chanel and Hermes bags, her lavish trips to Dubai, the diamond tennis bracelets, things a 1-year-old secretary could never afford on a $45,000 salary. I had questioned David about it once. He defended her, saying young girls just like nice things, that I was being paranoid and jealous. Now I realized some things don't just magically appear out of thin air. That night, Ben and his forensic accounting team tore through the last 2 years of contracts. The results were staggering. In just the first 11 contracts they audited, they found hundreds of thousands of dollars in off-the-books discrepancies. The total skimmed amount approached $1 million. That number silenced even my father. He looked at me gently. "Hannah, do you want to pursue criminal charges?" I stared at the stack of fraudulent invoices and slowly nodded. "Dad, I don't care about revenge, but I demand the truth." Meanwhile, across town, David was living through hell. The plant was a ghost town. The machines were gone. Employees had mass resigned. Lawsuits were flying in. Friends wouldn't return his calls. That evening, he dragged himself into his empty, echoing house. His mother was sitting at the kitchen island looking furious. "David, I need the truth," she snapped as he walked in. "Are you hiding something from me about the business?" David collapsed onto a bar stool. "Mom, please not now." She slammed her hand on the counter. "Don't not now me. The bank manager called me today. She said your company is drowning in debt." David looked up sharply. "The bank called you?" "Yes." His father walked into the kitchen, his face grim. "Tell us the truth, David. How bad is it?" For the first time in his life, David didn't know what to say to his parents. the illusion was shattered. He couldn't even comprehend his own collapse. Seeing his silence, his mother started to panic. "David, speak! Are you going bankrupt?" "No," David shouted, jumping up, but even he didn't believe it. Right then, his phone rang. It was Vicky. His mother saw the caller ID and immediately pushed him. "Answer it. Don't let the poor girl misunderstand what's going on." David hesitated, then picked up. Before he could say hello, Vicky's voice cut like ice. "Where are you?" "At home. Come to my apartment. Now." "Why? What's going on? Just get here." She hung up. David felt a knot of anxiety tighten in his chest. 40 minutes later, he unlocked the door to Vicky's luxury apartment. As he walked into the living room, he froze. Sitting on the velvet sofa was a young, sharp-looking man in a tailored Zegna suit, wearing a Richard Mille watch that cost more than David's entire remaining payroll. Before David could speak, Vicky crossed her arms. "David, this is Kevin." The man smiled smoothly. "Nice to meet you, David." The atmosphere in the room was toxic. David looked at Vicky. "Who is this?" "We're seeing each other," Vicky said flatly. It felt like a baseball bat to the ribs. David couldn't breathe. "What the hell are you talking about?" Kevin didn't even flinch. I think Vicky made it clear. "David, we're together." David turned his furious gaze to Vicky. "And what about me?" Vicky rolled her eyes. "What about you? We aren't married. I can date whoever I want." David's blood boiled. "I divorced my wife for you. I threw my life away for you." Vicky cut him off sharply. "Stop using that line. Nobody put a gun to your head and forced you to divorce Hannah. You chose that." The room fell dead silent. Kevin just sat there entirely unbothered, making the humiliation even worse. "Honestly, David," Vicky sneered, "I think we're done. I never promised I was going to marry you anyway." Every word sliced open a new artery. David stared at the woman he had burned his kingdom to the ground for. She wasn't even trying to hide her gold digging anymore. He suddenly remembered what I told him once. Some people love you for who you are. Some people love you for what you can give them. When you lose everything, you figure out who is who. David stood there for a long time, then turned around and walked out. For the first time in his life, he felt like the biggest idiot on the planet. But that wasn't even the biggest shock, because at that exact moment, my legal team had finished tracing the embezzled funds. And the banking report Ben handed me revealed that the offshore account receiving the skimmed money didn't belong to Vicky. It didn't belong to David either. It belonged to someone I never would have suspected. My mother-in-law. I stared at the glowing monitor for a long time without saying a word. Honestly, if the money had gone to Vicky, I wouldn't have blinked. A 19-year-old girl obsessed with luxury brands and designer lifestyles, skimming money from a gullible older man, tale as old as time. But seeing my mother-in-law's name as the primary beneficiary on that hidden account left me more deeply disgusted than angry. For 5 years, I treated that woman like my own mother. When she needed back surgery, I took 2 weeks off work to bathe her and change her bandages. When David's father had a mild stroke, I was the one driving him to physical therapy at 6 a.m. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, I bought all the gifts for their extended family. I never imagined that the woman who called me her darling daughter was quietly pocketing embezzled cash from the very company I funded with my own money. Ben pushed a printed ledger across the desk. "Hannah, we verified it. Over the last 2 years, there were 17 wire transfers routed through shell vendors directly into your mother-in-law's private account. Amounts ranging from $30, zeros in to over $100,000, totaling roughly $900,000. My father, sitting next to me, let out a heavy sigh. To actively sabotage your own daughter-in-law to this extent, it's just pathetic. I didn't respond. Memories were flashing through my mind. Times she complained about needing money to fix the roof. Times she said she wanted to buy a vacation condo in Florida for her retirement. Times she guilt-tripped David for not providing enough for his parents. Every time I was the one who quietly wrote the check. I had no idea I was being bled dry from both ends. Ben's phone rang. After a brief conversation, he looked at me. "Hannah, one more thing." "What?" "The bank just informed us that David filed an emergency petition this afternoon to contest your ownership of the repossessed assets." I nodded. Expected. A drowning man will claw at anything. The problem, Ben continued, is that the petition includes a sworn affidavit from his mother. She perjured herself, claiming that the initial seed money was entirely David's and that you were simply holding the assets in trust for the marital estate. My father let out a cold, sharp bark of laughter. Where's their proof? They don't have any, Ben said. The room went silent. We all knew what this meant. This wasn't just a divorce anymore. This was a scorched earth war against people who refused to accept reality. Meanwhile, in the Baron McMansion, David sat in the echoing living room. His mother paced nervously. David, you have to figure something out. You can't let her take everything. David leaned his head back, exhausted to his bones. Mom, do you think I haven't tried? His father scowled. Is the company really that far gone? David didn't answer. He couldn't. His supposed friends were dodging him. His vendors were suing him. Vicky had traded him in for a richer model. Everything was gone. Don't worry, his mother said frantically. I'll go talk to Hannah. I'll make her see reason. David let out a dark, bitter laugh. You think she wants to hear a word out of your mouth? His mother stopped. David looked at her with hollow eyes. The day I handed her those divorce papers, you were the happiest person in the room. You told her to leave with nothing. You pushed me to marry Vicky, and now you want to go beg her. His mother had no response. Deep down, she knew if the roles were reversed, she would never forgive me either. That night, David drank himself into a stupor. At 5 a.m. his phone buzzed. It was Tom, the former CFO. David, you need to see this. See what? David slurred. I pulled a backup server log before I left. Meet me at the diner on 4th Street. Half an hour later, David sat in a booth, nursing a black coffee. Tom slid a USB drive across the table. This has the shadow ledgers from the last 2 years. What's on it? Tom looked at him with pity. Look for yourself. David took the drive home, plugged it into his laptop, and opened the files. Within seconds, his face drained of all color. The offshore accounts, the dummy invoices, the wire transfers, the names. One column was Vicky, the other column was his own mother, nearly $1 million. David read the numbers 10 times, his brain refusing to process it. He grabbed his phone and screamed into it. Mom, get up here now. 10 minutes later, his mother walked into the office looking terrified. What's wrong? David spun the laptop around. Explain this. She looked at the screen and turned chalk white. Mom, what is this money? David, let me explain, I said. What is this money? David roared. It was the first time in his life he had ever screamed at his mother. She started sobbing uncontrollably. I just wanted a nest egg. I was scared of getting old. I was scared you wouldn't be able to take care of us. David stared at her, horrified. $1 million. A nest egg. His mother couldn't look him in the eye. David felt the ground open up beneath him. He thought Vicky's betrayal was the ultimate knife in the back. But his own mother, the woman who constantly bared me for not being a good enough wife, who claimed she only wanted what was best for her son. In that agonizing moment, David realized the brutal truth. The only person who had ever genuinely protected his company wasn't his mother, and it certainly wasn't Vicky. It was me, the woman he threw away. Right then, his phone rang. It was his lead commercial banker, David. I have bad news. Titan Construction just formally canceled their master service agreement with you. David slumped into his chair. That was the absolute last major contract keeping the company on life support. And at that exact moment, I was walking into a private boardroom in a high-rise downtown, invited by a coalition of our former clients. This meeting would decide the fate of the manufacturing equipment I had seized, and it would also reveal one final pathetic truth about David. I arrived at the boardroom feeling far calmer than I had in the days immediately following the divorce. When you survive the worst of the pain, emotion is replaced by sheer clinical clarity. I wasn't losing sleep over David anymore. I stopped asking why the man I built a life with turned into a monster. Some questions don't deserve answers. The reality of their actions is the answer. The executives in the room were some of the biggest industrial players in Texas. Men and women who had known me since the early days of our startup. Many of them had done business with my father. They remembered me staying up until 2 a.m. negotiating supply chain logistics to save their margins during the pandemic. When I walked in, they all stood up and greeted me with genuine warmth. It reminded me that true respect isn't derived from a fancy title or a custom suit, it's earned through years of integrity. After a few minutes of small talk, Howard, the CEO of Titan Construction, leaned forward. "Hannah, there's something you need to know about how David was operating." I nodded. "Go ahead." Howard looked around the table. "About a year ago, my board wanted to sign a massive 5-year exclusive manufacturing contract with your plant. I remembered that if that deal had gone through, our revenue would have tripled overnight. But David told me the client backed out at the last second." "We didn't back out, Hannah." Howard sighed. I froze. "Then what happened?" Howard slid a folder across the table containing printed email threads. "During the final negotiations, David tried to jack up the price by 30% to pocket a massive kickback outside the terms of the master agreement. When we refused, he got arrogant, insulted my procurement VP, and blew the deal." I stared at the emails. It made me sick. Not because of the lost money, but because I realized David had died years ago, the hard-working, humble man who stayed up all night to perfect our first CNC prototype was gone. He had been replaced by a greedy, arrogant fraud who thought he was untouchable. Honestly, another executive chimed in. "We all wanted to keep doing business with you, Hannah. But dealing with David's ego became a liability. Story after story came out. Lost bids, insulted partners, shady backdoor demands, gross mismanagement. I had been completely shielded from because I stepped back to let him shine. By the end of the meeting, I understood why the company collapsed so fast. It wasn't because I repossessed the machines. It wasn't because of the divorce. The foundation had rotted from the inside out years ago. I just happened to be the one who ripped down the drywall so everyone could see the termites." That afternoon, back at my new office, Ben walked in looking serious. "Hannah, bad news." I sipped my coffee. "What is it?" "The bank just issued a formal notice of default on David's primary commercial loan. It's moving to collections." I stayed silent. "The issue," Ben continued, "is that you were the original guarantor on that note." I smiled softly. "I was, but I severed my liability and restructured the guarantees 3 months ago. Remember?" Ben let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Ben smiled. "Thank God you did. If I hadn't seen the warning signs months ago and legally firewalled my assets, David's sinking ship would have dragged me to the bottom of the ocean." Meanwhile, the atmosphere in the McMansion was apocalyptic. My mother-in-law had suffered a complete mental breakdown after being caught. She cried, begged, and tried to justify her embezzlement, but the more she talked, the worse it got. It turned out that over the last 2 years, Vicky had been using the skimmed cash to buy my mother-in-law's loyalty. Designer bags, luxury cruises, high-end jewelry, all bribes to keep the old woman on her side and turn her against me. David sat listening to it all, his face ashen. He finally realized that if his mother hadn't actively encouraged his affair, if she hadn't constantly pressured our marriage, things might have been different. But it was too late. That night, David received a certified letter from the county court, and several major creditors had filed joint civil lawsuits. The damages demanded were astronomical. Staring at the mountain of legal threats, David felt true visceral terror. Not the anger of a wounded ego, but the cold dread of a man staring into the abyss of absolute ruin. As a thunderstorm raged outside, he sat in the dark of his office. He pulled open a bottom drawer and found an old battered leather notebook. It was my old operations ledger from our first year in business. He flipped through the yellowed pages, ordered raw aluminum, paid hourly wages, met with Howard, secured bridge loan from Dad, sold my Honda to cover Friday's payroll. David read the entries for hours. Eventually, he let out a broken, agonizing laugh. For years, he convinced himself he was the genius who built the empire. But reading my handwriting, he saw my ghost in every single brick of the company. His success was nothing but a mirage built on my blood, sweat, and tears. Right then, his phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. The caller spoke briefly, but the words left David paralyzed. A major private equity firm was offering to buy the bankrupt remains of his company for pennies on the dollar, and the managing partner of that firm was my father. David held the phone long after the call ended. Outside, the rain lashed against the glass, washing away whatever was left of his pride. My father wanted to buy his company. A year ago, David would have laughed in his face. But now, with the plant dead, the debt crushing him, and bankruptcy looming, he had no leverage left. Yet, the last shred of his ego couldn't stomach selling his empire to his ex-fin. David didn't sleep. The next morning, he called me. I picked up Hannah. His voice was a raspy whisper. "I need to see you. I'm busy. Please, just 10 minutes. I looked out at the Dallas skyline. I knew this day would come. People only realize your value when they lose everything. But by then, their regret isn't about losing love. It's about losing the utility you provided." I agreed to meet. That afternoon we sat at a quiet corner table in a coffee shop near the Arts District. David was already there when I arrived. In just a few weeks, he looked like he had aged 10 years. His tailored suit was replaced by a wrinkled button-down. He hadn't shaved. Dark circles bruised his eyes. The arrogant playboy was gone. I sat down across from him. David stared at me for a long time, as if searching for the woman he used to control. But that woman died the night he handed her divorce papers. "What do you want, David?" I asked. He took a shaky breath. "Your dad wants to buy the company. I know, you know." He looked down at his hands, twisting his fingers. "Hannah, you won. You beat me." I remained completely silent. I never viewed this as a game to be won. The winner in a divorce isn't the one who walks away with the most money. The winner is the one who keeps their dignity. David let out a bitter chuckle. "I thought you were going to cry. I thought you would beg me to stay. I thought you couldn't survive without me." I looked him dead in the eye, and now he looked up, his eyes red and glassy. "Now I know I was the one who couldn't survive without you." The words hung in the air. I looked out the window at the bustling street. I thought back to our tiny first apartment. The nights we stayed up running math on a whiteboard. The times we split a $5 footlong because we were broke. It was a beautiful memory, but it belonged to a dead man. "I'm not asking you to take me back," David whispered. "I know I don't have the right. I didn't flinch, but I have to ask." He choked out. "If I hadn't met Vicky, if I hadn't asked for the divorce, would we have made it?" I looked at him for a long time, then slowly shook my head. "No." David stiffened. "Why? Because Vicky wasn't the cause, David. She was the symptom. You changed years ago. The moment you started disrespecting the people who helped you, the moment you thought the success was solely yours, the moment you stopped being grateful, the marriage was already over." David lowered his head even further. He knew I was right. The meeting lasted less than 30 minutes. As I got up to leave, David called out to me, "Hannah." I stopped. He stood up looking utterly defeated. "I'm sorry." It was the first apology he had offered since the divorce. I didn't reply. I just gave a curt nod and walked out the door. An apology that comes after you've lost everything doesn't fix the past. It just makes the guilty party feel better. 2 days later, the buyout negotiations were finalized. My father sat across from David in a sterile conference room. David looked numb. He didn't argue. He didn't negotiate. He just stared at the buyout sum, barely enough to clear his personal liabilities and save him from prison for fraud. He signed the papers. When the pen lifted from the page, the company officially belonged to my family. My father looked at him. "David." "Yes, sir. I didn't buy this company to humiliate you. I bought it because I refused to let hundreds of good blue-collar workers lose their jobs because of your stupidity." David nodded, tears finally spilling over his eyelashes. He finally understood why my father had backed him 5 years ago. It was never about the money. It was about believing in a hungry kid with a dream, and David had spit in his face. The factory was restructured. I took over as CEO alongside my father. We rehired the staff, brought the machines back, and within months our old clients returned. As for David, his life unraveled. The McMansion was sold to pay off lawsuits. His luxury cars were repossessed. His mother, disgraced and terrified of prosecution, became a shut-in. A few weeks later, I got a text from an old acquaintance. "Did you hear? Vicky just got indicted for wire fraud and embezzlement. I put my phone down. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. Karma always collects its debts eventually. But I didn't expect that a few days later, my former mother-in-law would show up at my office building. My secretary buzzed in saying an older woman was begging to see me. When the door opened, I barely recognized her. She had lost weight. Her hair was completely white and she looked frail. She walked in and stood awkwardly in front of my desk. "Hannah, have a seat," I offered, pouring her a glass of water. She took it with shaking hands and suddenly burst into tears. "Hannah, I am so sorry. I was so wrong." I watched her cry. I didn't feel anger, but I didn't feel sympathy either. "For 5 years you did everything for us," she sobbed, "and I treated you like a servant. I thought we were invincible. Now everything is gone. David is a shell of himself. He works a night shift at a logistics warehouse now. He won't even speak to me." I looked out at the industrial park. Actions have consequences. He regrets it, Hannah. He truly does. He still loves you. I shook my head gently. Regret doesn't rebuild a burnt bridge. I don't hate him, but I don't love him anymore. She placed a small velvet box on my desk. I recognized it. It was my old wedding ring and David's wedding band. "I wanted to give these back to you," she wept. I pushed the box back across the desk. "Keep them or sell them. They belong to a past I no longer need." She broke down entirely, finally realizing that the door was permanently locked. A few months later, I was standing on a stage at our company's annual banquet. Hundreds of employees were cheering. My father was sitting in the front row, beaming with pride. Looking out at the crowd, I realized something profound. Sometimes the most agonizing losses in life are actually the universe clearing out the trash to make room for your real destiny. My marriage failed, but my life didn't. A woman's worth is not defined by her ability to keep a man. It's defined by her ability to rebuild her empire from the ashes of his betrayal. Kindness is a virtue. Sacrifice is noble. But kindness needs boundaries and sacrifice demands respect. Never lose yourself trying to hold on to someone who is perfectly fine with destroying you. After the storm, the sky always clears. As long as you have the courage to keep walking forward, peace is always waiting on the other